Full Stack Basics presents Master JavaScript. Unlock the power behind the frameworks.
Frameworks are optional. Understanding JavaScript is essential. Smart responsive UI has nothing to do with React or other frameworks. If you understand how filtering and highlighting work in vanilla JavaScript, you'll never be afraid of props, rendering, or reactivity again. What are we building in this episode? Search bars are everywhere. You can see for yourself: Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, just to name a few. We're building a real-time filter that responds instantly as you type without having to hit submit, as you can see here. And we will show that JavaScript can do everything React does. And if you don't know how it works underneath, you're just a user of frameworks and not a creator. So let's dive into vanilla JavaScript.
This premium content is brought to you by Full Stack Basics JavaScript Bundle. Create a full stack Kanban board prototype with Vanilla.js and the Gem stack, including registration, login, and drag and drop functionality without libraries. Next, create a production-ready Kanban board with the Mern stack, including Google single sign-on and drag and drop. Learn more at fullstackbasics.io/projects.
Go ahead and open your budget tracker with vanilla JavaScript. We're going to start in style.css because what we want to do is give that highlighting effect that we saw in the demo. So go ahead and include this class with these properties. Pause and implement. Now we're going to take a quick stop at index.html. And in index.html, right above the on-order list, I want you to include an input of type text with the ID of search and the placeholder search transactions. Please pause and implement. For this episode, we're going to continue to work on app-ep08. Please go ahead and meet me there. I am going to minimize this function here, and we're going to scroll down and we're going to work right above the init function. So go ahead, meet me there, and make some room so that we can implement some code. So the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to gain control over the search input, which is that input field that we just included in index.html. We're going to include or store that in this search input variable. Pause and implement. Now, what do we want? Well, we want to listen for the event in which there is input in this field. When that event takes place, then we want to call this anonymous function that I'm implementing here. Nothing new and nothing that we haven't done before. Please pause and implement this. When we get the input, when we get that event in which there's input on the input field, first thing we want to do is actually store the query. For this, we're going to get the value in the search input and we're going to turn it to lowercase. Pause and implement. Then what we want to do is to actually filter the transactions based on the input that we're getting. So for this, we're going to create this variable called filtered, and we are going to go to the transactions and we are going to filter through the transactions. So go ahead and implement this snippet here. How are we going to filter through the transactions? Well, for each transaction, we are going to get the transaction.description to lowercase, and we're going to check if it includes the query. This is the first thing that we're going to do to filter this. Please pause and implement. Once we get the transaction that includes what's coming in the query, for example, coffee, if you type in the search bar CO, that's included in that specific transaction. So once we have that, we are going to pass that filtered and the query to a function that we are about to create called update filtered UI. So pause, finish your event listener, so then we can work on this function. Now that this is done, I am going to minimize our event listener, and we are going to come down here and start implementing our function update filtered UI. This function takes the filter list and the query as parameters. Please go ahead and implement the bare bones function. The first thing that this function is going to do is go to the space where we have the transactions, where we're showing the transactions, which is the UL with the ID of transactions. And then we're going to simply clear the inner HTML there because we want to only show what we are searching for. Pause and implement. Next, we want to grab the filter list, and what we want to do is use for each again to loop through every transaction in your filter list. So go ahead and pause and implement this. Now, as we know, in the transaction list, we have individual transactions. Then we're going to put the arrow here and a set of curly braces so that we can work inside of this for each. Go ahead and do the same. Since we are filtering through the transaction list based on the query, this means that we have to create a new list item for the items that actually match the query so that we can display them. Pause and implement. Next, we want the index. Now, let me save here so that you can actually copy, and let me explain what I mean here. What we want is to know at what index of the specific transaction does the query match. For instance, if we type C, we know that for coffee, that is the first index of that specific transaction, more specifically of that specific description in the transaction. Pause and implement. The next thing we're going to do here inside of the for each is a conditional statement. So what do we want to say? If the index is greater or equal than 0 and it matches the query, let's open this up. So go ahead and implement this. Then we want to see if the match is before, if the whole query matches, or if it matches after. Pause and implement this inside of the conditional statement, and then I'll proceed to explain a little more. So let's say we are searching, and this won't work for you just yet. I just want to explain those 3 lines as clearly as possible. So if I try to type S, as you can see, S for salary matches right at index 0. It matches right at the beginning. Also, S for groceries matches right at the end or after the part of the match. And the other thing that we can have here is that if I just type coffee, it matches the whole transaction, which is when the query actually has one perfect match. But when you have just random queries, for instance, I put E here, it's right somewhere in the middle of these 2 words. So that's in essence what those 3 lines of code that I asked you to implement here will do. So make sure that your function update filtered UI looks like mine up until this moment. Perfect. So we continue to work inside of the if statement. Once we have those 3 matches, before, match, and after, then of course what we want to do is actually include in the inner HTML the span with either the before, the match, or the after. And this is also going to give the highlight effect that we included in style.css. Pause and implement. Then we're going to have an else here, and here is very, very simple. At the very end, what we want to do is actually show in the text content of the li the transaction and the amount of the transaction. Pause and implement. So I'm going to actually minimize the if else statement like so. I'm going to make some more room down here because then, of course, depending on whether or not what we're filtering is an income or an expense, we want to give the li the class like so. And then lastly, whatever we find in our search, we want to append it to the list because, as you saw in the demo, it will only show in the list things that match the query. Pause and implement. So why don't we open this with live server and meet me over at the browser? So here I am going to add a few transactions and then we can start filtering. So for instance, if I do A, we know that the salary, the book royalties, and the private plane have A's, but it doesn't have a double A. If I type book, it brings that one up, private. So as you can see, our search works, and the moment it doesn't make sense, it doesn't show anything. This looks great. So what did we learn here? In this code implementation, you have built a reactive search filter without using useState from React. Also, you built highlighting logic without JSX, and you controlled the rendering with low-level logic. No React, no frameworks, just JavaScript and our minds. Now it's time to do this in React. So go ahead and open your budget tracker in React. In your React version, first thing we're going to do is come all the way up here. I am going to delete this here just for now. I'm sure you have it. So just so that we have a little more room and things are a little cleaner. We're going to start with a new state variable for search, which I'm going to include right here. Pause and implement. Now that we have our state variable, I'm going to minimize the use effect and the handle submit. And right above the total, I'm going to include a variable called filter, where we are filtering the transactions based on the value in our search state variable. Pause and implement. Now that this is done, I want you to come down to your JSX, and right above the UL, I want you to include this input field of type text. The value is going to be whatever is stored in the state variable. We have the onChange to listen for input events, and we have the placeholder and some styling. Go ahead and implement this. Now, we need to go ahead and change our UL logic a little bit to actually match for both cases, displaying the transactions and also displaying the filtered transactions. So what I'm going to do here is keep those curly braces, and I'm going to say filtered.map. And in here, each transaction or each item in the filter is a transaction that has an index, which I'm just going to call I for now. We're going to include the arrow and a set of curly braces and make some room so we can include the code here in the map function. Pause and implement. Now here we are going to include the following variables. First, and once again, we're still inside of this function here. We want the lower description, or the description to lowercase, also the search to lowercase, and then we want the index and the match length. Pause and implement. We're also going to include the before, match, and after like we did in vanilla JavaScript. Please pause and implement this. Right inside of here, I'm going to make some more room. We're still inside of the map function. And what I'm going to do is include a return statement like so. Pause and implement. So what are we returning here? Well, we are returning a list item. So include the list item, pause and implement. Then the list item is going to have the key and the following conditional styling. Pause and implement. I'm going to scroll up so we can now work on what we are displaying in between the li. I'm going to include a set of curly braces because this gives us room to implement JavaScript logic. Please pause and implement. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the index, and whenever the index is greater or equal than 0, or equal to obviously the search, then what we do is the following. Put a question mark here, and then include a set of brackets here and open up. I'm going to include here something called a fragment, which we have used before. The fragment is inside of these two brackets that we just included. And basically what I'm going to include in this fragment, let me include it and format, is how we're going to display the before, the full match, and the after. So pause and implement. So then what we're going to do is include a colon here and another set of brackets. And I'm going to open up in this set of brackets, because then what we're going to include here is the description of each transaction. I'm going to save to reformat. Please pause and implement what we have so far. Be very careful with the syntax. And now, right outside this curly brace, but still within the li tags, we're going to include another set of curly braces where we are going to include the dash and then the transaction amount. Please pause and implement. Last stop here is that we're going to go to app.css and we're going to include the styling for the highlight, like so. Please implement. Once implemented, run your application and meet me over at the browser. First, let's test by including a few transactions. I'm going to include more money for you here for a speaking engagement. And then after your speaking engagement, you're taking the family down to Fiji, which I'm going to say is going to run you $200,000 because you run in style. Pretty sure you have a yacht and a private beach and all those cool, awesome things that you can get with this kind of money, right? So perfect. Everything seems to be working fine. And now if we try to search, we get the same effect. And this is awesome. So now let's talk about what we have learned. If you notice, the search feature didn't really need React. React just made it more declarative. And if you didn't know how to filter or highlight or re-render and how that works in JavaScript, you will be stuck. But now you actually understand what happens under the hood. Perfect. I'll see you in the next one, where we're going to tackle final truth, truth number 10.